Well, let's take a look at this interface so I can explain to you how the technology works. And again, I apologize on my end for having some kind of connection issues. Right now, I switched from my laptop to a phone. So you're looking at me from a different angle. And in fact, if you want, you could see my laptop and see the shindig from both sides. So the way this works is we have an interface that allows multiple ways for you to communicate with different people. So on the very top of the screen where I am and where this PowerPoint is just for another minute is called the stage. Everybody can see and hear everything coming from up here. And other people can join this. And I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Below us is what I think of as the participant swarm. This is where everybody is. This is the group I used to think of as the audience. This is where you are, and this is how you can see other people. In fact, if you want to talk to somebody, if you want to just chat with them, you can take your cursor, place it over somebody else's cursor, double click on it. If they want to chat with you, you'll be able to move your two icons together and you can have your own private audio-visual bubble. So that's one way to talk to other people here. Let me show you a few more ways to feed the conversation. Look at the bottom of the screen. You'll see there's a white strip running along it, which has a whole series of different buttons. On the left edge is a button which looks like the number 62 along with a chat box and a few different dots of people's heads. If you click that, up will pop two different windows. On the left is what looks like an old film strip, a list of everybody who's come in so far. And you can just scroll over that and see all kinds of people like Sonia, like Julie, like R. David, Leslie, and Christy. And you can learn a little bit more about each one of them. You can learn, for example, that Roxanne Riskin is a learning designer. And you can learn that Julie Meyer is also a learning designer. So that's one thing you can do. Now, to the right of that is the chat box, and this is where you can type in chat and just have quick, informal or formal conversations with other people. You can see if you scroll through it right now that people have been introducing themselves and people have been helpfully answering my questions about my technology glitch. This is a good spot for people to ask questions or bounce ideas off of, and I find that people often share URLs as they come up during the discussion. So the chat box is a good one. Go back to that white strip. Next to the chat box icon is a question mark with a circle around it. If you mouse over it, it'll say ask. If you click that, you can type in a question or a comment that you want everybody to hear and see. So click that, and when the time is right, we'll flash it on the screen for everyone to see, and I'll read it out loud for everyone to hear. And next to that is the best icon, a raised hand. If you click that, that'll tell us that you want to join us up here on stage. It's really easy. When the time is right, we'll beam you up on stage and you can join us and converse just as easily as if you were in person. The only thing you need to make sure is that your mic is working, your phone is working, and you're a place where you can talk. So those are three ways that you can have conversations here. If that's not enough, if you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag FTTE, and there's already a conversation happening there right now. So my point about diving through all this technology and showing you all the pieces of the interface is so that you can see the different ways that you can discuss. Because what I'm doing right now, talking at you, is going to stop in just a second. And I wanted to thank Shindig once more for making this technology available. Now, next slide, Tara, please. Now, the other source of our support is friends on Patreon. If you haven't seen Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, unless you will fund a creative person collaboratively. And you can see there there are dozens and dozens of people on Patreon who are supporting me in this work, the future of education. And they contribute as little as $1 a month just to make sure that we have the funds to keep the lights on, the technology running, and the bills paid. So if you'd like, you can join people, as you can see on this slide here, like Michael Haggins, Jeannie Kim Han, Paul McConaughey, Kyle and Bob Johnson, no relation, Chris Lott, and all these great people in supporting us. Go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander and learn more. We're grateful to all the patrons for their support. Now, onward. This week's guest is Vickie Cook, who is coming to you from the broiling American Midwest. She's the executive director for the Center for Online Learning, Research, and Service, and she's here to talk with us about the rising generation. I don't mean millennials, I mean their successors, commonly referred to as Generation Z. What are they like? Are they digital natives? How can we best support them? What are their unique pedagogical and support challenges? Let's talk. So, Tara, if you could bring down the slides and bring up Vickie, we can begin. And as we're beaming Vickie up on stage, remember, all the options I just showed you for asking questions are all available right now. Hello, Vicki. Can you see and hear us okay?
Hi, Brian. Yes, I can.
Excellent, excellent. Well, greetings. I'm really glad you had the time to join us today. Um,
Thank you for
Thank you for
inviting me.
coming. My pleasure. So tell us, if you could, what do you do right now? What are you working on this year?
Well, I'm at the University of Illinois, and my particular focus is on really looking at the scholarship of teaching and learning and how we can more
Uh,
effectively engage students using new types of technologies and thinking about innovation in our teaching and learning.
Fantastic. That's just the stuff that we need to hear about. Excellent. And what are some of the major issues that you're working on this summer and this fall?
Well, this summer and going into the fall, we're really looking at how new generations of students are coming into college prepared in different ways to utilize technology and ways they're not prepared to use technology in learning. And how can our faculty more effectively engage? So, using things like AI or artificial intelligence, virtual reality, how are those things going to impact our classrooms? And how are they going to impact us both on campus and online?
That's a lot to cover. Terrific.
Indeed.
Um,
Indeed.
well, I look forward to hearing about your progress. And before we go today, you'll have to tell us how we can keep up with your work.
Okay, great.
So, well, to begin with, let's talk about Generation Z. First of all, is that the term we should be using, and how do we define it? What's the demographic breakdown for this?
So, Generation Z, or for any of our Canadian colleagues who might have joined us, Generation Z.
Generation Z.
Um, so we really look at that as students who are born from 1995 to 2010. So they're really our undergraduate students at this point, and they really come with a very different values, different structures of learning, different culture that they have been born into because of the time frame that they were born. But with all that
Mm,
said, Brian, I want to make it really clear that um, we put labels on generations, and those students all bear some similarities, but we all know that students are very different and have to be
mhm.
respected for where they are and what they bring. So I always want to start with that before we talk about the characteristics and values about a generation.
That's an excellent, excellent caveat. And we're talking about roughly how many people? About 70 million?
Yes, about 70 million.
It's a lot of diversity within 70 million.
It's a lot of diversity, a lot. And what I've found through my reading and research is that, irregardless of the country in which the student was born, they still share some of the characteristics that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, let's talk about some of those characteristics. Well, how would you distinguish, generally speaking, with all these caveats, members of Generation Z from their elders?
Yeah, so some of the things that we can think about, especially in terms of millennials, which we've been very used to and we've been working with, Generation Z comes to us as being someone, being an individual group of people who were born with technology, completely engaged. The term that you may see out there is phygital. And
Ah,
phygital is the combination of the physical and the digital. So think about how many times you go out to eat and you take a picture of your food before you begin to enjoy it. Or how many times you are at a tourist attraction with your family and you take a picture of it and post it on social media before you actually engage in the actual activity.
mm,
And so those are the kinds of things that this generation has grown up with. Not necessarily knowing how to learn using technology, but being immersed completely in technology as I know the term digital natives is one that we've talked about a lot. That may not even quite get to this generation. They don't know a difference between the the digital
mm.
world, and the physical world. They are together as a phygital generation.
So augmented reality just simply makes sense because it represents the blending of the digital and the analog that they've been accustomed to since birth.
Absolutely, absolutely it does. And they, they're very accepting of many of the technologies that sometimes those of us who are not in Generation Z have a hard time wrapping our minds around in how we might utilize it. And for them, it is a natural utilization of the technology that's there.
Well, that makes all kinds of sense. Thank you. Let me just ask, by the way, if everyone could think about these characteristics that we're describing, if you want to chime in the chat box with any of the ones that you're seeing as well, if you're a member of Generation Z or if you have family who are, please add some thoughts about that. We'd like to hear your comments. Um, so when we talk about technologies, I mean, the digital world is enormous and very, very extensive and very diverse. Which of the technologies do you see Generation Z most thoroughly embracing? For example, do you see them immersed in gaming? Do you see them using LinkedIn? Are podcasts on the radar, or what are the leading technologies that they should know that we should know that
So,
they immerse?
anything that can be used with mobile, because really mobile is their first go-to. So if it is not mobile friendly, and that goes for an LMS or anything else, if it's not mobile friendly, Gen Z is not going to adapt to it. They really, really want the mobile connection. They love social media, but they want it on their own terms. They don't necessarily want others to dictate to them how they utilize social media. If they are on Facebook, they're on Facebook so that they can talk with their grandparents. They're
Mm.
looking at ways to really create technological environments that allow them to build community and to make a difference. Those are very important characteristics of this generation. They are very entrepreneurial, so they are looking for ways to use technology to achieve additional income. And they are very, very concerned about not only their economy, but the economy of our world, the global economy, and how
Mm.
that impacts us. So the technologies that impact economy are very important to this generation.
Okay, so if we're talking about beyond technology, you're seeing them as very community oriented, very interested in entrepreneurship, and very committed to making a difference in the world.
Mhm. Yes, definitely. They really believe in social justice. They believe in equity. They want to really make a difference. So when we think about, many of us think about the millennial generation as being very entitled, and this generation has already seen kind of the school of hard knocks. They've seen their parents lose jobs. They've seen their homes not be valued where they were when they were born. They've seen all of that impact on their parents and on their extended families. They've had a lot of challenges to deal with economically that the millennial generation didn't necessarily have as a generation.
Mm.
So those are all challenges that this generation has dealt with that puts them in a different place psychologically as far as working with entrepreneurialism, thinking about careers. So often they think of having what has been termed a slash career. They'll study to become a teacher, but they're going to waitress on the side. They study to become an attorney, but they're going to run a photo business on the side. They're looking at ways to really build their world in new ways, and many of them are looking at how can they actively, really, really make a difference in the world. How can they make the world better? And so I think that's something they don't get enough credit for. But if you look at some of the activism that's happened around the country with this generation just since they started turning 18, you can see that they are really beginning to think about how can I make this world a better place? And what is my part in that? And technology is just second nature. It's so we'll use technology, we'll use our mobile devices to help make those things better.
An activist generation.
Yes, in many ways. So some writers are saying that this generation is the closest thing to the baby boomers that we have seen since the baby boomer generation. Because the baby boomers were really inventive, creative, they were looking for ways to change the status quo. And many writers, many researchers are saying that Gen Z is the same type of activist looking to change the world.
So this makes the disdain and criticism that comes from boomers directed their way especially ironic.
Especially ironic. You know, I think that once you get past the technology and some of the fact that this generation has some negative characteristics, they don't necessarily know how to talk face to face with people. They would be much more
Hmm.
comfortable in this environment than sitting down across from a desk with you and talking with you. So those are things that have to be thought about with this entire generation is how do we as people in education, and we use a lot of technology, how do we also encourage socialism in a way that will allow them to build skills and become
Hmm.
social
Hmm.
community members?
Friends, I'm going to direct the discussion towards education right now, um, very appropriately. But I would, if you have any questions or thoughts about the sociology of Generation Z, or if you have any alternative names that you might use in your community, please click the different options at the bottom of the screen to join in. We're happy to hear from you by a raised hand, an ask button, or the chat box. So, Vicky, I have to ask, thinking about all of this, it sounds like you're describing a very challenging generation that is turning 18 and coming to our colleges and universities at the traditional age level,
Right.
at the undergraduate level. What are some of the major differences that this generation presents to us in the classroom then? Are they less likely to be engaged in face to face socialization with faculty and each other? Um, can you speak to that, please?
Certainly, they are less likely to come in with the types of social skills that previous generations had. They're also less likely to seek out face to face activities. They may be very comfortable going to an area in the student union and getting on social media than going into the student union and looking for potential friends to hang out with.
Hmm.
So those are some of the challenges that I think that we'll have to think about as colleges, how we interact with social media. I think also in the classroom, the days of saying, okay, everyone put your device under your desk,
Yeah.
um, that is going to really challenge this generation, and this generation will challenge those kinds of norms. They not only want to use their devices to learn, they're very adept at self-directed learning. So they can really find ways to pull in and help with the learning if given the chance using the technology that they're aware of. And the more technology that universities allow them to utilize or provide for them to
Right.
utilize, I think the more that they will be engaged with learning. But if you look at some of the innovation
Hmm.
labs around the country, the MITs, or even the small innovation labs that have been opened, Generation Z really goes to that space and loves that ability to create, to find new ways to old problems. And I think that those kinds of approaches to learning will be exciting for faculty members who are really engaged in teaching and learning.
Well, these are really very, very large differences and very, very challenging differences that we need to bring up. I think. Oh, before I go further, we've got a question from Baynard Bailey. So let's bring him up on the stage if we can. Otherwise, I'll read him out loud. Let's see what we've got. We need to have a dramatic drum roll, I think, just before this happens. Hello,
Hi there.
Baynard.
Can you hear me?
I
You're muted. We need to have.
Oh,
There you
I
go.
unmuted. I thought, oh, we're good.
Yep.
Okay, so my story relates really pertinently to the points that our guest was just making. Um, I go on these field trips with environmental studies class, and I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now, and it's always been a great opportunity to sort of be part of informal conversation. And I really looked forward to it, both because I'm an alum for the institution I work with, and the
Mm,
last year, it was a big sea change. It became get in the car, put on your headphones, and ride silently in the car. And I reflected upon this
mm.
with the professor because I really lamented this change because it made it felt like a lost opportunity. The space of the car to become social, to engage, to exchange, not just talking about the class, but just campus life or anything. And and
Yeah.
it was a sad moment for me to think that this may not be something people do anymore. I think the students may be afraid to, like, there's so many challenges on the campus and engaging diversity and pluralism. And I feel like, is everyone afraid to talk to each other now? So this seems to be a change. And I just thought I'd share that little story with today's topic. Thank you.
Well, it's a good start. Before you answer, Vicki, which institution are you at, Baynard?
I'm at Vassar College.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, this face-to-face interaction is especially important. Yeah. Vicki, what do you think?
Well, I think you're having exactly the type of experience that everyone is going to start having with this group of students. They are not going to necessarily find that face to face. We will have to lead them in that way. And what I've told many people that I've talked with about this is that we have to find ways to include the technology as we are leading them in conversation. So not to say put away the technology, but drop an earbud out and let us know what you're listening to, or have everybody tuned in to a podcast and then discuss that podcast, or have them find a particular piece of information that goes with it, environmental studies, and look at that. I think there are ways to utilize technology more efficiently. We always make the assumption that if they're on their phone, they're doing something besides paying attention. Or if they're on a laptop, they're doing something besides whatever you want them to do. If you can utilize that technology to guide them, that doesn't mean everybody will be with you, but then they won't be even if they're looking straight at you, right? People are still daydreaming. But if you can guide that conversation and utilize their technology in new ways and allow them to learn using it, you will help guide them toward learning more social skills and understanding the value of those skills, which is equally important for this generation. Another huge component, you were talking about your trip, which is really a great opportunity, but a number of these students are not very physically active. And so that is also going to change how some of the things that we do with the undergraduate programs changes, because they are so connected with devices. They don't necessarily get outside and look at the trees or go to a stream or hike or fish or any of those types of activities the previous generations might have done. And so looking at the physical aspect of what we're asking students to do can also be challenging.
Well, that's
Do
a
you have
great
any
answer.
specific technique for including the technology in the social sphere environment? My understanding is Twitter is really just for old people. So
So, Snapchat and Instagram are the two go-tos right now. There are others that are out there. Pay attention, ask them, what are they connecting with their friends on? And who are their friends and how to connect with them. I'm still a big believer in Remind, which is just a little free app that allows students to opt in, but allows you to communicate out to students. Students don't read email, and your Gen Z students are not going to read email. And so I know a lot of institutions are looking at ways to do to actually make it harder to log into email for security. Well, they're not reading it now. So if we make it more difficult, they're not going to read it at all. So I think thinking about the technologies that we implement at our institutions and what we are suggesting bring in students and ask for a focus group. Ask them what they want and pay attention to what they're using in their social realms. And then see how we might adjust for that in higher ed. I mean, the other thing we always have to worry about is sticking with our FERPA compliance and our cybersecurity. And so we have a lot to balance as we think about the technologies. But what can we do instead of always going to a place of, well, we can't do that? And I think students can really guide us in that way. And I'd really strongly suggest that all of you have student focus groups on any of your technology committees or groups that are working on technology for your students.
That's great advice. Boehner, great story. Thank you. Thank you. We have a bunch of questions that are coming in text as well. So let's bring up Keisha Johnson's text. Let's see if connected learning philosophy fits well with this generation.
Absolutely. Connectivism is exactly what this generation is looking for. Also, if you are at all familiar with pedagogy, this is a philosophy that really allows students to do self-directed learning. It is a really strongly aligned with use of mobile devices. So take a look at the literature on pedagogy and on connectivism. It's exactly what this generation needs as we prepare to help them learn.
Are you using connectivism in the sense of Stephen Downes's theory of connectivism?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And we just to barge in, we've had Stephen as a guest before, and hopefully we'll have him back again. But I'll just quickly, again, if in the chat, this is a great place to toss in links for suggestions. I'll quickly toss in pedagogy so people can see the term. But Keisha, what a great question. This is a profound pedagogical shift that we have to undergo. More questions have come in. I think we had some from, let's see, from Leslie Ragus. Leslie, if I mispronounce your name, please, I'm very sorry. In K-12 classrooms, do you feel it's more valuable to foster more face-to-face activities and interactions to encourage more personal socialization as adults, or include more digital differentiation? That's a good K through 12 question.
I would say yes. It's important. Yes. The thing about the millennial generation, if you remember, K-12 was very collaborative. And so when the millennials came to university, everybody was about collaboration. And there's a couple of speakers that talk about the differences between the millennial generation and Gen Z. And one of the things that they say is that Gen Z would rather share socks than share an office space because they absolutely are not collaborative. So when you think about the differences between just millennials and Gen Z, and we think about how we do group work, collaboration, well, group work's a wonderful thing for people to learn, but today they need to learn it more using some type of a platform, distance learning, using a technology like Shindig. What a great way to introduce your students to group work, rather than having students sit around a table in a library and talk about a presentation that they may be giving. The more authentic work that you can bring in and the more ways that you can introduce technologies into that group work that's more authentic to what they will be doing will help them with globalization. And I think that's true of K-12 and higher ed. And for those of you who are currently in higher ed, if you really want to know what tomorrow's student is going to look like, get with one of our colleagues in K-12 and go visit their classroom, because you will see exactly what student expectations are and where they are pushing the envelope on what they expect in the classroom. And you'll also see that our K-12 colleagues are really far ahead in thinking about these new generations and what directions that they are taking their teaching.
Well, it's excellent advice. Very, very important advice for people to take. We have, so again, we're crossing the boundary between higher education and K-12. We wanted to bring up somebody on video. And Tara, did you want to throw up the podium button so we can make it even easier to join? Oh, let's see if we can get the awesome Keisha Johnson on video. Hey, Keisha, where are you?
Hey, I'm in Ann Arbor.
Of course you are.
Yes. I was noticing because you know, I have younger children, and they're so pragmatic. Like they'll sit back and they'll say, "Wait a minute, hold on. What's the shortest point on how to get there? And this is how we're going to get there." And I laugh because they're so serious. They're very serious about their comments. They might go off and play and stuff like that, but they very serious. And I'm like, where did this come from? This pragmatic imagination, because it's not like they don't imagine and have fun with it, but it's more like a pragmatic imagination. And I'm like, where did all this come from?
What do you think? Vicky, does that come from the experience of economic stress and cultural upheaval?
It does, and that they have been exposed to a lot of different things through technology now. So they've seen a lot of just thinking about our entertainment today. It's very different than
Mm.
it was in the past. Pragmatism is probably one of the best words you could ever use for this generation. They are very pragmatic. And it's amazing to watch a high school classroom, an incoming college student. They approach things very pragmatically. They are extremely creative, but they do it from a pragmatic perspective. So, and their use of technology is the same way. They do not want technology for bells and whistles. They want
No.
technology going to serve a purpose.
I have, like, here's an example. A girlfriend of mine, you know, like I'm open to new technology, and she shared with me this communication app called Marco Polo. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, it's kind of like a walkie-talkie or type thing. Oh, they laughed at me. They were like, oh my goodness, why would you use something like that? And they told me specifically why. Using something why would you want to do that when you can instantaneously speak with somebody? Why would you want a walkie-talkie? And I'm like, I started laughing because in my mind, I thought that was kind of cool because it reminded me of, you know, how I grew up. But in their minds, they were like, no, see, I'm going to stay on Snapchat because no older people are there.
That's right. That's
And I
Oh,
exactly
it's
thought it
right.
true.
was hilarious.
Well,
That's a great
I don't,
example.
well, we just did the. We're still doing the survey of Future Trends Forum participants, and among other things, we ask which social media technologies are you using most often. And I'll save the answer for another time to create mystery about it. But the one that has zero was Snapchat. Not a single person so far.
How can you use that in a classroom setting? That's the key. Like, it's not even object
Hmm.
oriented type thinking. It's a whole different type of thinking on how to bring that in. And for them, now they probably that could be a good question for one of my classes, from some of my students. Like, how can I use this from an educational standpoint?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you so much. I read some of your literature, your website. I shared it on the chat. I thought it was very interesting. Even some of the articles, even though they were taken from 2015, they still are so very valid. Like, hey, where are we? Where's our measurement? Because nowadays I'm seeing like people, like when you share content, they were like, oh, this isn't recent. And I'm like, wait a minute. There's a lot of things to measure where we're at now that takes time. And so I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your work, and thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that, Kisa. And we really appreciate you. Thank you for contributing so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Okay, Tara, take me off. Hey, Maria.
Okay. And we welcome Maria. Where are you today?
I'm back. I'm home in Salt Lake today.
Ah, well, great. Good to see you again. This is Maria, the CEO and founder of CourseTune. Welcome.
Thanks. So I just wanted to kind of make a clarifying point of perspective. I don't think it's that this generation is particularly good with technology. I think it's that the technology of the time does define some of the behaviors of the generation. Because the
Hmm.
Generation X, we were dang good at using the telephone. You knew how to like call somebody to keep their parents from picking up the phone. Like, I'll call somebody else, then you call me, and I'll get you in on call waiting. Like, we knew how to use the technology of the time. I think, even if you go back as far as silent films, if you grew up with silent films, you knew how to read every nuance in a silent film. Like, the generation always knows the technology of the time well. It's just that the differences in technology shift the behaviors of the generation. And I think that is true. But it gets under my skin when I hear like this generation is really good at technology. No, they're just good at their technology.
I don't think Vicki said they were good at technology. She said they inhabited technology.
Yes. Yes.
So
They
that's a clarifying point.
they are not good with learning at all with technology, and that's really and of course the social aspects that we've been talking about. And really this is where I think we have to guide them in that use. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, because how do we more effectively guide this generation to use the technology well, and to think about future technologies? Because that's the other part that we haven't done generationally really well, is we're really good with the generation that we grew up with, but what about the next generation of technology?
Yeah, so I use a couple of strategies here with students that I'll just share one or two. We, first, I use cell phone technology in the classroom all the time. We use a graphing calculator app that's on their cell phone. The first semester I did it, I learned there needs to be boundaries around it, because otherwise they will spend the whole class time texting. So I put boundaries around it and a release valve in the middle of class. So I have a 2-hour class, and I give them, never did before, but I give them a 5-minute break in the middle of the class. And I say, you may use a 5-minute break to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, or text. And that seems to do it. Like, as long as they know it's not 2 hours away, and then I am specifically giving them the time to do it, they are much better about stepping away from it the rest of the time, right? And until I did that, it was not that good. But then the other thing I do is just try to bring in as many examples as I possibly can about technology into the classroom, right? Graphs about technology, ethics about technology. We start almost every day of class by going over some recent article from the previous 3 days that had something to do with math and some issue that relates to them. So I think just recentering the subject on things they care about is important.
Absolutely.
Well,
Both of those are great strategies.
Thanks. The first class was a bit of a disaster. Go ahead.
Well, can I quickly, because this comes up in my work a lot, what do you think about the digital of generating, for example, vinyl records, of doing handcrafts, that kind of thing? There's a current out there which I hear from older people, which says they think there's a reaction happening against the digital world. Are you seeing that? Will we overcorrect by doing too much in the way of digital stuff?
Who are you asking? Probably Vicki.
Both of you.
Oh, go ahead, Vicki.
Go ahead, Maria. You go first. Go ahead.
So I think that there's never a time when there isn't a slight nostalgia group in the world, right? Like, I mean, when 8-tracks went out of style, there were still people who coveted and collected 8-tracks. And when, there's always a group of people who likes the nostalgia and the old way of things and the way it makes you participate in a different way, right? I don't think this is necessarily a backlash. I just think it's normal. And we might notice it because it's some of our technology that's now showing, our being, oldsters here. Our technology is now the old stuff they're going for. And so we're like, hey, what is this, right? But I don't think it's new. Like antique stores, like all sorts of stuff. We've had this forever.
So I would agree with that to some degree. I think that is very true. I think the other piece of this whole discussion is that we need to help, as you said earlier, set boundaries for technology. And I think once students have especially a boundary set, they're more likely to see that is a boundary they want to enforce. And so I've noticed that as I've just talked with students and interacted with students, those whose families set boundaries, a technology-free day, a technology-free vacation, no technology during dinner, they have an easier time of setting those boundaries. For those students who've never had those boundaries put into place through either a high school or a family situation, they find it much more difficult to do self-imposed boundaries with technology. So I think that rather than a backlash, so to speak, it's more of setting boundaries and knowing what those are. And I think they like to explore some of what they consider the older technologies, and including vinyl records and some of those types of things. But I think they like to, yeah, and I think they like to explore in new ways some of those technologies to figure out how they can change them and make them different. And I find that process of watching their creativeness in maker spaces to be very interesting.
Thank you. Well, these are great answers. But we have a few more comments that go back to Snapchat, I think, and its use with Generation Z. Let's bring one of these up. So Steve Covello mentions Snapchat as student-defined geocaching or geofencing.
Well,
Excuse me.
that's interesting. That's a great definition.
Yeah, it really does. Because they put a fence around what they can say. And then Brittany adds Snapchat and reflections would be great, and you can send them directly to specific people. Whoops. Oh, okay, Tara, can you restart that? Snapchat and reflections would be great, and you can send them directly to specific people. You collaborate back and forth, and then come to class with a well thought out discussion. Also, sorry, Snapchat continue. You can use the chat feature to continue the conversation as long as needed. Okay, so use Snapchat as a kind of alternative to texting and to discussion forum.
Maybe as a back channel.
Very good. That's a really neat pedagogy. Wow, two snap quick answers that are really handy. Thank you.
Those are great.
Thank you. Friends, let me know if we want us to dive into using Snapchat and other social messaging services as a topic for the Future Transform down the road. But I'm also conscious that we are running out of time. We have about 9 minutes left, and we've covered a lot of stuff. I think we have a question from Roxanne Riskin, a great friend of Future Transform. Roxanne asks, what do we need to do now and proactively to prepare our campuses for the enormous demands of VR, AR, Wi-Fi bandwidth, etc.? Because barriers can divide those who can't afford innovative labs. Great question,
Yeah.
Roxanne.
That's an excellent question, and a really difficult question. And I think one of the most difficult pieces of that is the institutions that are struggling economically right now are not in a place to apply for some of the more lucrative grants that could bring these things. Again, I would call on students who are willing to help make things better, make our communities better, to help the institutions really advocate for public money to assist with building bandwidth, especially in rural areas and areas where it's very difficult for institutions to be able to afford these kinds of things. I think that's an excellent discussion. Roxanne and Brian, you could probably do a whole hour just on that at some point.
I think we really could. I mean, the digital divide is something I've been working with for a while. But Roxanne, if you have to go, I understand completely. But thank you so much for that powerful question. Digital divide is a huge issue. And Vicki, I've rarely heard people suggest that students, specifically Generation Z students, step up, combining their social activism with their desire to use the technology. That's fantastic.
That's right.
Friends, we have time for about 2 more questions. So if you want to throw a question out, please use one of the buttons at the bottom of the screen, the ask or the raise hand or the chat box. While you're thinking, I've got a question that I wanted to ask. This is from a fantastic new essay that just came out looking back at the financial crash of 2008 and looking back at its impact on the subsequent decade. John Lanchester mentions this interesting point. He says, I noticed talking to younger people who turned 20 during or since the crisis, the idea of capitalism being thought of as morally superior elicits something between an eye roll and a hollow laugh. Their view of capitalism has been formed by austerity, increasing inequality, the impunity of finance, and the spectacle of increasing corporate profits with declining real pay. So a question that I take from that is, how do you see Generation Z viewing the economy? Do you see them flocking to Bernie Sanders and other candidates who are socialists, or do you see them embracing capital in the form of entrepreneurial activity?
I see them mostly embracing capitalism with entrepreneurial activity. Not to say that they're all in that court, of course, but I think that what we could say about most of them goes back to what Keisha had said, and they are pragmatic. They know that life is not going to be what it was in the 80s. They hear a lot about the 80s, and they like 80s music, so there's that. But when we think about when we think about the part of themselves of going out and earning a living, and what we haven't even discussed is student loans and the high cost of higher education, and
Right.
honestly, that's why a lot of them are not coming straight into college, because they are looking at that high cost and saying, will this get me where I want to be down the road? And so thinking about a pragmatic approach to economy, and I think they will be somewhat conservative in their approaches to political activism and to the social fiber of our culture.
I see. And they're also working much more than previous generations did during college.
Absolutely. And usually 2 and 3 jobs. It is not a single job that they're holding. So they may have a student worker job on campus, they may work at a McDonald's, and they may deliver pizzas. But they are doing that to try to reduce that heavy burden of student debt. I think that pragmatism will also affect our financial aid offices in how we help students understand student debt. I think they'll come in with a whole different set of questions than their millennial counterparts did.
I think you're right. Well, then let's turn this around. From millennials, we were speaking of Generation Z before, or Generation X before. So Marie and I had to represent that, and then we were talking about millennials and Generation Z. And as Generation Z ages, they're starting to have children. What do you think we should expect from that next generation? Call it Z Prime or Z Plus.
So there are some that are calling that Generation Alpha, but I don't believe that will stick. And so as we look at that generational literature, I think we're going to see the impact of today's economy still playing heavily on that generation. We're going to, of course, see a huge impact of technology. Children now will have a whole different view of technology by the time they enter kindergarten. And they get to kindergarten, they will already be pretty proficient. I don't know if you've been around any preschoolers recently, but they can, grab a cell phone and call someone with no problem. They can make a post very quickly. Thinking about teaching our children about safety online and in cyber connections is going to continue to play a huge impact on this next generation. So I think this is going to keep us on our toes as far as what the technologies are that we bring into our institutions and how we utilize that technology in an ethical way. I think we're starting to see some ethics come into technology in ways we hadn't previously. We're also starting to see with the new European Union Privacy Act some privacy that is going to be put into play that is going to impact both our current generations and the future generation.
Well, we have to think of Z as faculty and as staff coming up.
Absolutely. Think about our faculty discrepancies between our oldest faculty, who right now I think the average age in the U.S. is 48. But we have many faculty who have chosen not to retire, again, because of economic challenges with retirement. And then those youngest faculty who are now just joining, who are in the millennial area. And we have a large number of Generation X. All of those generational components also affect the leadership. And Gen X has typically not stepped up to be in a leadership role. They've looked at other roles for themselves. And so how this will all play out is definitely going to affect how the generation that was born after 2005, or 1995 to 2010, how the newer generation is going to be impacted by the decisions we're making today.
That's a great vista. As a coda to that, we've got one comment from a participant who only has the name of the letter M. And Tara, let's flash a comment from entrepreneurship seems to be more common for this generation than any other in the recent past. They seem to be open to starting their own businesses, and many of them more than one business.
Yes, absolutely. Part of that is because the internet makes it very easy to open a business. And so we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are doing things online. Think about that, though, as the next one was about training. Think about that in terms of training and education. Are we training these students in business practices? And how might we better equip them by helping them understand how business is run?
So maybe that we see more and more in terms of economics or business as a curriculum.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In relation to many other disciplines.
Oh, that would be really interesting to see. Well, I hate to say it, but we are out of time. We have, speaking of just-in-time learning, this is just-in-time conclusion. We've covered an awful lot of ground, and you've given us a terrific look into this rising generation. Thank you so much, Vicki.
This has been fun. Thank you.
Well, before you go, tell us, where can we best find you? Where can we best keep up with your research and work?
So down at the bottom of the screen, you have more on me, and that takes you to a link that is my webpage. It has all of my recent presentations are listed there, and there's several on Generation Z. As I get new material, I put it there. I will leave you with one thought, and that is, and this is just to think about, but who really owns Star Wars? So when you think about that, which generation owns Star Wars? And then I will leave you to think about that and ponder that and come up with your own conclusion.
Oh boy. Oh, I'm going to resist answering that. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, I'm going to take that to Twitter, Vicki. Thank you so much. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
We're going to follow up with more questions. We really appreciate it. Now, before everybody goes, let me just leave you with a few notes about what's coming up over the next week. So don't take off just yet. Remember that on the left edge of the screen, the bottom, we have a widget for Vicki, so you can pop that up. Next week, we're going to talk about a related subject. We have Linda Dunia, who is at Inisa Education, and what she's been working on is using mobile technology and other devices to reach the poorest students in Africa. And so the real question is, how can we expand education to the most underserved population in Africa? So this is going to draw together our talk about mobile devices, about the digital divide, but also about international education. So please stay tuned for next July 5th. Now, also, we have other things going on. So, for example, Tara, over the next slide, we have on the next slide, we have the book club. We are voting for our next book. We have almost 100 votes in already. Now, this is a science fiction reading where we use science fiction, near future science fiction, to think about where education technology could be headed. We have some great choices, some furious discussion. So please click on that. Of course, on the bottom left of the screen, there's a widget, which you just click on that directly and it can pop right up. But please help us pick the next book club reading. And then on top of that, just remember to use this survey. We want to hear from you. I think, friends, that's about all. We're over time. Thank you all for coming. If you want to stay in touch with us in the next week, use the hashtag FTTE or tweet at or Facebook at or LinkedIn at all these different sites. Thanks again for thinking about Generation Z. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.